Welcome. I'm Ed Wright, Director of the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies. We're here today to begin a review of Judaic Studies, which is at the University of Arizona, which is now 70 years old. You're going to see in this series a few people who have been prominent in the history of Judaic Studies. They will be faculty, staff, students, who have played significant roles in the history of Judaic Studies here at the University of Arizona. Our first guest is Professor William G. Deaver. Professor Deaver received his PhD from Harvard University and was Professor of Near Eastern Archaeology here at the U of A from 1975 to 2002. Upon his retirement, he was awarded emeritus status by the university. He currently serves as Distinguished Professor of Near Eastern Archaeology at Lycoming College in Pennsylvania. Professor Deaver was also honored with an honorary doctorate from the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. Professor Deaver's archaeological field experience includes directing or co-directing several digs in Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Cyprus. He also has extensive academic administrative experience. He served as director of the Nelson Glick School of Biblical Archaeology in Jerusalem and as director of the W.F. Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem. While at the U of A, Professor Deaver served as head of the departments of Oriental Studies and Near Eastern Studies. He has held visiting professorships at several institutions, including the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Brandeis University, the University of Michigan, Andrews University, and Ben-Gurion University in the Negev. When it comes to his scholarly publications, few scholars have been as productive as Professor Deaver. His list of publications now numbers over 500. Apart from hundreds of scholarly articles, he has also published dozens of scholarly and popular books, including Did God Have a Wife? Who were the ancient Israelites and where did they come from? And what did the biblical writers know and when did they know it? What archaeology can tell us about the reality of ancient Israel? Bill, welcome back to the U of A.
Thanks, Ed. It's good to be back.
We're delighted to have you here, and in conjunction with this brief talk, you're giving a lecture this afternoon, and we're all looking forward to it.
So am I.
We're looking forward to what you have to say. I would like to just start with asking you about the process of how you came to the U of A. Can you describe what brought you to the U of A and when all that happened?
Well, it was a long time ago, but I do remember. I was sitting in my office at the Albright Institute in Jerusalem, where I was director, in December of 1974, and I got a phone call from a man who introduced himself as Rabbi Albert Bilgray. Mm-hmm. And we talked a bit, and he said, "We'd like you to come here for some lectures." And I said, "Well, where is Arizona? I've never been there. I've never been west of the Mississippi. I don't think I want to come." Well, he persuaded me. He said, "Come, we'll talk." So I came. I wasn't going to, but my mother became very ill at that time, and I came home partly to see her. I remember going to her funeral in the morning, boarding the plane that afternoon for Tucson. The next day, I gave a lecture in the anthropology department, and the next morning, I met with John Schaefer, then president, and Dean Paul Rosenblatt. We had breakfast together, and I was hired. Later, when I came, I learned that Al Bilgray had cooked this whole thing up. Al people remember him still. He was a remarkable rabbi. He was deeply involved in community affairs. He was the chairman of every board you could think of. And he had taught Hebrew for a long time, part-time at the university. And Al came up with the idea of creating a Judaic studies program with 4 initial appointments, 2 in the ancient world and 2 in the modern world. He decided to start with the ancient world. So he looked around and he realized that most of the other appointees would probably be Jewish. So the first at a state university, to be diplomatic, perhaps should not be someone Jewish. So we went to Arnold Ban at UCLA, who said, well, why don't you get an archaeologist, preferably a non-Jewish archaeologist, some promising young man in Israel. And with the help of 2 or 3 other people, they found me and persuaded me to come. So I did, and I was the first appointee in the program. There was no program. There was only my course in archaeology. When I got here, nobody knew who I was. I didn't have an office. I didn't know what to teach. I'd never taught before. The next year, I became head of the Oriental Studies Department. So I was titular head of a Judaic Studies program that didn't exist. It was only me. And then in 2 years, we hired Peter Machinist to come here in Biblical Studies. Peter stayed with us 8 years, went off to Michigan, and then occupied the Hancock Chair at Harvard, the 3rd oldest chair, endowed in 1639, and has just retired. So the 2 positions in the ancient world were filled. Then we hired Daniel Swichenski to do studies of Marano populations, Jewish population that had almost forgotten they were Jewish in Mexico, and Esther Fuchs to teach Hebrew. So we filled the 4 lines that Al had created. But in the beginning, we had very little support from the community, almost none from the administration, except for John himself. And I don't think we dreamed of a program as such. We filled the 4 lines. There were a few classes where there were very few students. We started with nothing. I never envisioned what the program could become, largely under your leadership, sir.
Thank you. What was Tucson like in those days?
Better. Smaller. I think about 200,000 people. There was a little airport, and faculty could park free in the front yard of the airport. You just walked on the plane. That was it. Everybody knew everybody. The university was much smaller. And I loved living here then. Now I don't recognize anything.
What kind of problems would you say Judaic Studies faced in those early years?
Well, we faced not only antipathy, we faced a lot of opposition. The Jewish community was relatively small. The Jewish community in the state is relatively small. A lot of people didn't think a program of any kind of religious studies belonged in a state university. Even the Jewish community was not very supportive. At one time, we had a federally funded Center for Middle East studies, and people in the community decided they would like to close the whole thing down. And there were very few students. What I did was to begin excavating in Israel and to begin accepting doctoral students. And as you know, over the years, we turned out 28 PhDs. So by 1980, I would say, we were developing courses and we were doing field work, and my task was to put the U of A on the map. Archaeologically, I did that. Our program was bigger than Harvard's, and at some points probably better. But in the modern field, we suffered from the lack of appropriate long-term appointees.
What about your students? Tell us about your students.
What can I say except that I'm exceptionally proud of them? I told somebody recently, I'm so proud of my students, I would kill for them. And they said, you have. They're very good. They're better than I ever hoped to be. I tried to talk to them about method, about why the discipline of archaeology is important, and I talked to them about character, and they're working all over the Middle East, many of them directing their own excavations. They're publishing. They are in the forefront of our discipline, and that's my legacy, not the publications. My students will be doing good things long after I'm gone. They have their own PhDs now, so I have intellectual grandchildren.
Well, that's quite fascinating, because most scholars would say, my legacy, and then they would point to their resume and all the things on it. And you have probably one of the longest resumes
it's very long.
Of everybody in your generation.
It's very
before
long.
Or after.
Right.
So you have great pride in these students.
I do.
They're becoming leaders.
They are. They've become leaders in our national association. You're going to interview Jenny Abeling, who's lectured here, one of my best students. And I visit them in the field. I've lectured for nearly all of them. I keep up with them, and I still grade them. I still grade them. I have no reason.
So what grades do you give them?
A plus. I have no reason to be anything but very proud. And I don't take a lot of credit. I was there at a good time and place. They brought a lot of talent and energy and real dedication to the field. That's what I'm proud of.
So looking back, how would you describe Judaic Studies evolution in terms of it as an academic enterprise?
Well, the odd thing, now that you made me think about it, Al Bilgray and I talked a lot. We became good friends. He would come by to visit. But we never actually talked about a program. We thought of the 4 faculty lines we needed to fill. We thought of developing courses. We began to do some community outreach. But I never did any fundraising, and I don't know that I actually envisioned a center until maybe 10 years later, sometime around 1985. And I think when you came in 1990, that was the beginning of the modern period. I never had the title of Director of Judaic Studies. I was head of the old department, the Oriental Studies. Used to be called the Ornamental Studies Department. And it was an area studies department with ancient Near East, modern Middle East, Japan, China, Southeast Asia, and Judaic Studies was a program, an area program. I never had the title. Later, when it became part of Near Eastern Studies, I was the founding head of that department. So I suppose I was the head of the program, but I didn't think in terms of the kind of program you have. It was very short-sighted. I was preoccupied with my graduate students and with the department as a whole, and I didn't see very far into the future.
And maybe didn't have the full support of the administration for that.
What can we say?
Okay. Well, that leads me to say that your impact on the field and on the students here at the university has been enormous. Let me ask you one last question. What would you say are a few of the highlights of your career as a scholar and a professor here at the university? And what things, events, people do you look back with special satisfaction and pride?
Well, people think of the spectacular discoveries, but I can tell you, and Jenny will tell you, it's the accumulation of the small things you don't appreciate at the time. You're building up a detailed picture of life in the remote past. It's not a single discovery. It's the accumulation of knowledge. I excavated the famous Solomonic city gate at Gezer, and now recently we have carbon-14 dates that confirm that it is indeed 10th century. When I excavated a village site of the early Bronze IV period, about 2000 BC in the Negev, it was the first such site ever to be fully excavated and published, and remained so until this day. And then later, I discovered and published the famous inscription that mentions Yahweh, the God of Israel, and his Asherah, Asherah being the name of the old Canaanite mother goddess. And I was the first to argue that God did have a wife. I always say it was okay, he divorced her later. But now it's common knowledge that early Israelite religion was not monotheistic. So it was my inscription that I published promptly in the Nelson Glick Festschrift that began Asherah studies, now a big thing. But it's not the individual discoveries. And once again, the real legacy is the students. My work will be obsolete in time. It's meant to be. But the students and their students will carry on a tradition in which I was steeped at Harvard. I learned this from Ernest Wright of blessed memory and others of my teachers. And the tradition here will carry on. It's all about tradition.
You know, Bill, your work here, your impact on the lives of students, both undergraduate and graduate. When I look at it, you not only were the Dean of American Archaeologists, you were the Dean of the next generation of American archaeologists, because your students are going into leadership positions. And that shows the impact that Judaic Studies and other departments who contributed to the training of your students have in the lives of students. Judaic Studies at the University of Arizona is off in the corner of the country, not in a major metropolitan area, but it has a major impact. And that's something that we're celebrating in these 70 years.
Well, when I pick up a publication and I see Professor so-and-so, PhD, University of Arizona, it makes me immensely proud.
Well, Bill, we're very proud to have you as part of our team. and always will be. I want to thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
This is what happens at the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies. We work with our community partners, with our university administration, and we train people to have an impact in their chosen profession. Some of them become archaeologists or scholars. Others go off in any number of professional directions. But it is people like Professor Deaver who have an impact in the lives of students that is what makes the University of Arizona and the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies special. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. And thank you, Bill,
My pleasure.
for your part.
My pleasure.